I had made it to the point of getting the house all closed up, drywall on the inside. It was starting to look like a home, but it was still completely barren as far as furnishings. Not only that, but as far as finishes too. And those were the focus of what I'll talk about in this video. So in the first four parts, I talked about the design process, how we got to a finished design, and then the construction up to getting the framing done and the siding and the drywall done. So now there were the basic parts of the walls. Those were done. However, there was still stuff like floor sheathing was visible, also cabinets and stuff like that. We had no storage. We had no finishes done in the house. So that was what we were doing at this point, and we needed some of those done to get the building permit. Things like the flooring. We needed those particularly on spaces like the stairs. Get your finishes picked out before you start construction. There were plenty of clients I had while working for a general contractor as their lead and indeed only in-house designer. And they had said, just get the building permit as quickly as you can, get the design done as quickly as you can, and we will pick out the finishes later during construction, because that's something that isn't going to affect getting the building permit. And while they were right in that regard, still picking out the finishes before getting the building permit, and certainly before construction starts, and certainly before enclosing the house, that is a good idea to get those picked out before all those happen. Why do I say that? Because it is a headache to do when you have the house enclosed, then you're thinking, okay, what are we going to put on the floor, on the walls, on the ceiling? What are we going to put around the windows? Do we want to just wrap the drywall and not have any trim? Do we want to use MDF? Do we want to use stained wood? Something else? What kind of cabinets do we want? What wood is going to look good in ours? Do we want something other than wood for a different kind of look? What kind of railing do we want on our stairs? All these things are important decisions for the look of your house, for the function of your house in some regards. And it's just a headache to pick them out. It really is a lot of work to pick out finishes no matter when you do it. So it's better to do it before you start construction, because then you don't pause construction to figure out the finishes. Even when you're building your house yourself, you are still stalling the progress of your construction. That is something that is not great, especially with permit deadlines being, they can be pretty short. They feel short, at least the 2 years we got, which I think is generous. It used to be 1 year in our jurisdiction. Even that felt fairly short. So pick your finishes early so you don't stall your progress. Another thing that is important is the plumb level square of the elements of the house. You want things to be at 90-degree angles. Let me make that right. There we go. 90-degree angles. As much as possible, as close to that as possible. We found out the consequences in this stage of not having everything at proper 90-degree, 180-degree, whatever, either parallel or perpendicular. Those angles are very important. What are some examples of when that was a pain? Well, the first one that comes to mind is putting on drywall, at least getting ready for drywall. So we hired someone else out to do drywall. So backing up a little bit, I had to prepare the walls to be drywalled more so than I would have without the walls being plumb, I think was the main problem. The reason why is because the drywall needs to have a uniform plane on which it lays on the studs. You want studs faces to be lined up uniformly. And so you want one stud here, and then the other stud here, and then another stud here, to where they are their edges, this face and this face, if I can get my pinky to move well. You want those faces to be flush with each other. The problem, if they aren't, is that you can have a stud that's kind of like this on its face, and then a stud that's a little bit like this on its face, and then the next one back is a little bit like this. And when that happens, the drywall is going to wave once the drywallers put the screws in. And that's not good. So what I did to remedy that was put these cardboard shims that are about a 1/16 of an inch thick on the studs that were out a little bit. So this part right here, if this was out compared to a stud behind it that was more flush and like this, I had to put a cardboard shim on the face that was shy. And on the other side, of course, since the studs were going at roughly in a straight line, some of them were bowed. That was another problem. But what I had to do to counteract that on the other side of the studs most of the time was to take a planer and just plane. I had to take that on the other side of the stud and just go over and over and over to shave off some of the face of the studs so that the plane was flush enough to where when you look at the drywall, you're not going to be able to tell that it's wobbling a little bit. That took a long time, many weekends, 3 or 4 weekends. That is a huge value in having plumb studs. What's another thing that made it so that the plumb level square rule was evident? The trusses. Okay, so you want the trusses to be parallel. We had some roof trusses that were, if you're looking at them in plan view, a little bit angled one way and a little bit angled the other. Even this is an exaggeration, but it was enough over the span of 30 feet, which is the width of our house, to make it so that the drywall screws got misaligned. They had to, the drywallers had to do a little bit of creative work to make it so that the screws got aligned on the trusses because they only have 1.5 inches to work with. And so once that 1.5 inches goes off at an angle, their screws, which want to go in a straight line, are going to stop hitting that truss eventually. Plumb level square, that is very important. Then a somewhat unique part of my story is I was starting to study for the ARE, that is the architect registration exam. That was something that was an extra burden. I certainly wanted to get my architect license, and my wife and I had decided let's just do it, even though we're at the end of our building our houses. Studying for and then occasionally taking tests for the ARE was a huge time suck for me. Indeed, my wife and I agreed that I would decrease my time building the house and she would increase her time and leadership in building the house. That was a big burden for her to take on. So the general point here is if you're going to do anything big while you're building your house, especially for you married folks, make sure you and your spouse are on the same page. If you're going to do something like that where it's high commitment, high focus on the other thing, just commit, focus on it, and do the best you can with the house build outside of that. But then I would say sacrifice time with your friends, don't eat out, don't do fun things. I mean, you got to have fun to enjoy life to a point, but this is a season of just nose to the grindstone. You have to commit to finishing this project. So those are really the things I wanted to cover in this video about the finishes. To recap, 1, choose your finishes before starting construction and ideally before even getting your building permit. All of your finishes. 2, make sure your walls, ceilings, floors, all the big systems, all the big planes in your house are plumb, level, and square. That is very important. Even the foundation, especially the foundation, that's where it all starts. 3, if you're going to take on big commitments while building your house, I would say the time of installing finishes is the very beginning of the best time if you're going to do it at all. I would highly recommend waiting until you finish the house build completely. But if you can't wait, then at least wait for when you're installing finishes and communicate clearly with anybody else who is involved in the build. All right, so we got finishes done. I helped some. My wife and mother-in-law did most of the work on those, including choosing any finishes we had forgotten to choose. I helped a little bit, but not much. It was mostly my wife and mother-in-law who went to pick up and then install the finishes. God bless them. They did amazing work. They have very keen eyes. So we finished the house. We had the lower countertops. We were still missing a few items as far as casework, cabinets, stuff like that goes because they're so dang expensive. And they can be installed after the house gets the certificate of occupancy. But for the most part, we had finished out our house except for some cabinets and door and window trim. However, we could at this point get our certificate of occupancy. And so then we just had to move back to the ADU and focus on that. And that will be the focus of the next video. I'll see you there.